True freedom never comes without sacrifice. Sometimes, by freeing the body, we risk losing the freedom of the heart. The rain did not fall at the Academy of High Sorcery. It assaulted the stone. It was a relentless, cold drumming against the high, narrow windows of the northern tower, a sound that sought to drown out the scratching of quills on parchment. But inside the lecture hall of advanced metaphysics, the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that pressed against your eardrums and made the air feel thin. Here, silence was not merely an absence of noise, it was a law. Hermione Granger sat in the front row, her spine as rigid as the iron rod of her chair. She did not shiver, though the draft from the corridor was biting. Shivering was a physical manifestation of discomfort, and discomfort was a weakness. At the academy, weakness was not graded. It was punished. She dipped her quill into the inkwell, the movement precise, almost mechanical. Focus, she told herself, the word echoing in the cathedral of her mind. Do not look at him. But she could feel him. Draco Malfoy sat 2 rows to her left, separated by the dark expanse of the aisle and a chasm of blood prejudice that had only widened in this bleak elite institution. He was a shadow in the periphery of her vision. She didn't need to look to know that he was sitting with that aristocratic slouch, an arrogance that suggested the world bored him, even as he excelled at ruling it. She knew his pale hand was likely cramping from the speed of his writing, though his face would remain a mask of bored indifference. They were the best, the 2 pillars of the academy. The mudblood who had memorized every dark text to survive, and the prince who had been born with the darkness in his veins. The concept of magical resonance, Professor Blackwood's voice slithered through the room, dry as old bones, is not about power. Any brute can cast a blasting curse. Resonance is about intimacy. The word hung in the cold air, grotesque and dangerous. Hermione's grip on her quill tightened until her knuckles turned white. Intimacy was forbidden. Emotions were volatile variables in the equation of magic. They were taught to suppress, to compartmentalize, to lock their hearts in iron boxes and throw away the keys. To master the vinculum animae, the binding of the soul, Blackwood continued, pacing between the rows like a predator inspecting livestock. One must understand the mind of another. You must lower your mental shields. You must allow intrusion. He stopped directly in front of Hermione's desk. She stared straight ahead at the chalkboard covered in complex runic arrays. Miss Granger. Sir, she whispered, her voice steady. You are the shield, perfect defense, impenetrable logic. He turned on his heel. And Mr. Malfoy. Sir. Draco's voice was a low drawl, smooth velvet over gravel. You are the blade, sharp, reactive. Blackwood smiled, a thin stretching of pale lips that didn't reach his eyes. For the semester project on blood alchemy, we will not be pairing you by house or by aptitude scores. We will be pairing you by tension. Magic thrives on conflict. Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs, a traitorous bird trapped in a cage. No. Granger and Malfoy, Blackwood announced, the verdict falling like the executioner's axe. You will perform the binding. I expect the first stage of the ritual completed by midnight tonight. The silence in the room somehow deepened. Hermione turned her head. She couldn't help it. Across the aisle, Draco turned too. For a second, the rest of the class, The faceless purebloods, the terrified scholarship students, vanished. There was only the grey storm of his eyes meeting the brown defiance of hers. He didn't sneer. He didn't smirk. He looked tired. There were violet bruises of exhaustion under his eyes that the flickering candlelight usually hid. He looked at her not with hatred, but with a profound, terrifying resignation. He knows, she thought, a sudden chill racing down her spine that had nothing to do with the draft. He knows this is going to destroy one of us. The library at midnight was a tomb of knowledge. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the floor, dancing to the flicker of the enchanted floating candles. The smell was distinct: vanilla, dust, and the metallic tang of old protective wards. Hermione had set up their workspace at the furthest table, hidden behind the restricted section. She had arranged the ingredients with obsessive precision: a bowl of silver water, 2 obsidian daggers, a vial of nightshade ink, and a sheet of fresh parchment. She heard him before she saw him, the rhythmic click of dragon-hide boots on stone. He didn't walk, he stalked. Draco emerged from the darkness, throwing his bag onto the table. He didn't sit. He stood there, looming over her, his silhouette cut sharp against the candlelight. Granger, he acknowledged, the name sounding like a curse he was tired of reciting. Malfoy, she replied, refusing to look up from the textbook she was pretending to read. You're late. 3 minutes. I was avoiding the prefects, unless you wanted us both in the isolation cells. He pulled out a chair, the scraping sound harsh and loud. He sat opposite her, leaning back, crossing his arms. Let's get this over with. I have better things to do than hold hands with you. We don't hold hands, Hermione corrected, finally looking up. We have to mix a drop of blood into the ink and write the rune of connection simultaneously. It's a sympathetic magic transfer. Pedantic, as always, he muttered, but there was no heat in it. He reached for one of the obsidian daggers. His hand, she noticed, had a slight tremor, just a flutter, like a leaf in a breeze before the storm. Are you afraid? The question slipped out before she could check it. Draco froze. The silver blade hovered over his palm. He looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. The air between them crackled, electric and dry. Afraid? He whispered. I'm a Malfoy. Fear is beneath me. Your hand is shaking. It's cold, Granger. Don't flatter yourself thinking you affect me. I don't think I affect you, she said, her voice dropping to a hush. I think you hate this place as much as I do. I think you're exhausted. Stop, he warned. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea masked as a command. Open the book. Read the incantation. Let's do the blood work. He was deflecting. Hermione knew it, and surprisingly she let him. She was treading on thin ice. Pushing him now would result in him shutting down completely, and she needed his mind open for the ritual. She extended her left hand. Together. The cut must be made at the same moment. Draco hesitated. He looked at her hand, small, ink-stained, scarred from hours of practicing wand movements, then at his own. He took a breath, a sharp intake of air through his nose, and mirrored her position. On 3, he said. 1. They locked eyes. The grey was turbulent, like the ocean during a squall. 2. She saw her own reflection in his pupils. She looked small. 3. They sliced. A sharp sting, a bloom of crimson. They both moved instantly, letting a single heavy drop of blood fall into the bowl of silver water. The liquid hissed, turning a swirling, ominous violet. "Now," Hermione commanded, her voice trembling slightly. "The quill." They both reached for the large eagle feather quill. Their fingers brushed. The contact was scorching. It wasn't just warm, it was hot, searing like a brand. Hermione gasped, pulling back instinctively, but the magic of the ritual had already snagged them. It was like a hook behind the navel, yanking them forward. "Don't let go," Draco hissed through gritted teeth. He grabbed her hand, forcing her fingers around the quill, his larger hand clamping over hers to guide it. His skin was freezing, yet burning. The paradox made her head spin. "Right," he ordered, his breath hitching. Guided by his hand over hers, they dipped the quill into the violet mixture. They began to trace the ancient rune on the parchment, Connexio. As the ink touched the paper, the walls of the library seemed to dissolve. Hermione was no longer sitting in a chair. She was falling. She was falling into a dark, cold lake. But it wasn't water surrounding her. It was him. Sensations flooded her, raw and unfiltered. Not thoughts, but feelings. A crushing weight on the chest, expectations, a paralyzing cold in the stomach, fear of failure, a sharp, jagged shard of guilt, something about a bird he had been forced to kill. No, a memory. She felt a profound loneliness. It was a vast, hollow cavern, echoing with the words disappointment and legacy. It was so deep, so absolute, that it made her own loneliness feel like a puddle compared to an ocean. And then, under the ice, a tiny, flickering flame, a desire, a desperate, starving need for softness, for someone to see him, for someone to say, "It's okay to stop." "Granger!" The voice ripped her back to reality. Hermione gasped, air rushing into her lungs as if she had been underwater for minutes. She slumped forward, her forehead nearly hitting the table. Draco had recoiled as if burned. He was standing now, the chair toppled behind him. He was clutching his chest, his face pale as death, his eyes wide and blown with shock. He had felt her too. She knew it. He had felt her desperate need to prove herself, her terror of being found unworthy, her secret, burning admiration for his talent that she buried under layers of academic rivalry. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't empty. It was vibrating with the echo of their souls colliding. "What?" Draco's voice broke. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure, to rebuild the mask that had just been shattered. What was that? Hermione looked at her hand. The cut had already healed, leaving a faint white line. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the Malfoy heir. She saw the boy who was drowning. That, she whispered, her voice shaking, was the truth. Draco stared at her. His chest heaved. He looked at the door, as if contemplating running, then looked back at her. The cruelty was gone from his face, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that terrified her more than his anger ever could. He took a step back, retreating into the shadows. "We speak of this to no one," he hissed, but the venom was weak. "Do you understand, Granger? If they know I know," she said softly. "I won't tell." He lingered for a second longer, his gaze dropping to her lips, then snapping back to her eyes. The tension was unbearable, a magnetic pull demanding they close the distance, clashing with the instinct to flee. "Good," he choked out. He turned and strode out of the library, his cloak billowing behind him like black smoke. Hermione sat alone in the candlelight. She raised her hand, the one he had held, and pressed it against her racing heart. The library was cold, but her skin where he had touched her was still burning. She looked down at the parchment. The rune was perfect, but the ink wasn't violet anymore. It was a deep, shimmering gold, the color of a soul bond. She realized then, with a sinking feeling of inevitability, that the enemy she had been fighting for years was the only person in the world who now knew what it felt like to be her. And she knew what it felt like to be him. The game had changed. The rules of the academy could no longer protect them. Hermione blew out the candle, leaving herself in the dark, but the image of his haunted grey eyes burned bright in her mind. The bond did not fade with the rising sun. It settled into the marrow of their bones. For Hermione, the next morning felt like waking up in a body that wasn't entirely her own. It was a phantom sensation, a low, static hum at the base of her skull that wasn't a headache, but an awareness. It was the magical equivalent of hearing a radio left on in another room. She could feel a dull, throbbing irritation that didn't belong to her. She could feel the ghost of a tremor in her hands, though her own fingers were steady as she tied her tie. The great hall was a cavern of muted whispers and clinking silverware. Sunlight filtered through the enchanted ceiling, but it was pale, watery, filtered through the grey clouds that perpetually shrouded the academy. Hermione took her usual seat at the edge of the long table, opening her copy of Advanced Theory of Necrotic Wards. She tried to read, to sink into the familiar comfort of logic and ink, but the words swam. Coffee, too hot, burnt tongue. The thought wasn't hers. Hermione jerked her head up, her eyes scanning the room instinctively. She found him instantly. It was terrifying how easy it was. Draco was sitting across the hall, surrounded by his court of sycophants. He was staring into a cup of black coffee, his jaw set in a tight line. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes snapped up. The connection flared. It was a physical tug, a hook in the gut. He didn't look away. For a moment, the mask of the haughty aristocrat slipped, revealing a flicker of annoyance so sharp it made Hermione wince. "Get out," his eyes seemed to say. She looked down, her heart racing. This wasn't just a project anymore. They were tethered. The ritual had opened a door, and neither of them knew how to close it. The afternoon brought the physical defense seminar, held in the damp, echoing dungeons. The air smelled of mold, ozone, and dried sweat. Here, magic was not an art. It was a blunt instrument. "Pain," Professor Rosier barked, pacing the stone floor, his boots leaving muddy tracks. "Is a signal. Weak minds let the signal overwhelm them. Strong minds ignore it." The class was paired off for dueling practice. Non-verbal spells only. The goal was to break the opponent's shield without uttering a sound. Hermione stood opposite Theodore Nott. He was quick, quiet, and cruel. Draco was paired with Pansy Parkinson a few yards away. Hermione could feel him, not physically, but sensing his magical signature like a heat source in a cold room. He was bored. His magic felt cool, detached, slippery like mercury. "Begin," Rosier shouted. Nott didn't hesitate. A streak of purple light slashed through the air. Hermione deflected it with a sharp flick of her wrist, her protego absorbing the impact. She countered, a stinging hex flying from her wand tip. They traded blows, a dance of light and intent. But Hermione was distracted. Every time Draco cast a spell, she felt a distinct pull in her chest, like a string being plucked. When he shielded, she felt a wall go up in her own mind. "Focus, Granger," she chided herself. Nott saw her distraction. He feinted left, then slashed his wand downward in a brutal chopping motion. A bludgeoning hex caught Hermione in the shoulder. It wasn't a lethal blow, but the force of it spun her around. Pain exploded in her deltoid, sharp and hot. She gasped, stumbling back, her boots skidding on the damp stone. Across the room, Draco stumbled. He hadn't been hit. Pansy was merely adjusting her grip on her wand. But Draco hissed, his hand flying to his own left shoulder, clutching the fabric of his robes as if he'd been struck. The room went silent. Hermione looked up, clutching her arm. Draco was staring at her, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. He had felt it. He had felt her pain as if it were his own. "Mr. Malfoy." Rosier's voice was like sandpaper. "Is there a problem?" Draco straightened slowly, his hand dropping from his shoulder, though Hermione could feel the phantom ache still pulsing through him. He composed his features into a sneer, but it looked brittle. "No, sir," Draco drawled, though his voice lacked its usual languid weight. "Just lost my footing. The floor is filthy." "Then regain it," Rosier snapped, "and finish the duel." Draco turned back to Pansy, but before he cast, he shot a look at Hermione. It was venomous. "Stop getting hit!" the glare screamed. "You are making me weak." Hermione gritted her teeth, the humiliation burning hotter than her shoulder. She raised her wand, ignoring the pain. She wouldn't be his weakness. She would be his equal. The library that night was a sanctuary of shadows. The rain had returned, lashing against the glass, enclosing the castle in a watery fist. Hermione was waiting in their designated corner, the blood alchemy project spread out before her. She had been there for an hour, nursing her bruised shoulder and her bruised pride. When Draco arrived, he didn't storm in. He materialized from the darkness like a wraith, silent and brooding. He smelled of rain and expensive cologne, cedar and something colder, like snow. He stopped at the edge of the table, looking down at her. The air between them instantly thickened, charged with the static of the bond. "You're loud," he said. It wasn't a greeting. Hermione looked up from her parchment. "Excuse me?" "Your mind," he said, tapping his temple with a long, pale finger. "It's loud. Anxiety. Formulas. That incessant need to be right. It's giving me a migraine." "I can't control it," she snapped, keeping her voice low. "And you're no picnic either, Malfoy. Do you know what your mind feels like? It feels like a funeral." Draco's eyes narrowed. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, his movements sharp. "We need to finish the calibration of the tether. If we don't stabilize the flow, we'll eventually start sharing more than just sensations. We'll start sharing thoughts, and I have no desire to know what a mudblood thinks about in her spare time. And I have no desire to see the world through the eyes of a bigot," she retorted, dipping her quill into the ink. "Then work," he commanded. They worked in silence for an hour. The task required them to channel magic into the room they had created the night before. It was exhausting work, demanding absolute focus. They had to synchronize their breathing, their magical output. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm established itself. Slowly, the hostility began to bleed away, replaced by the pure, unadulterated intimacy of the magic. Hermione watched his hands. They were elegant, the fingers long and dexterous as they manipulated the magical currents. She watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the the way a single lock of platinum hair fell into his eyes. She felt a warmth blooming in her chest. It was admiration. He was brilliant. There was no denying it. His magic was intuitive, dark and graceful, weaving around her own structured, logical spells like smoke through a lattice. Draco paused. His hand stilled over the parchment. He looked up. His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide. He could feel it. He could feel her admiration. "Don't," he whispered. The word was rough, stripped of its usual polish. "Don't what?" Hermione breathed, her heart hammering. "Don't look at me like that. Don't think those things." "I can't help it," she admitted, the truth slipping out before she could catch it. You're doing it perfectly." "I know I am," he said, but there was no arrogance in it, just a weary acceptance of his own burden. He stood up abruptly, breaking the rhythm. The loss of his magical proximity made Hermione shiver. He walked to the window, staring out at the rain-lashed darkness. "You think you understand," he said quietly, his back to her. "You think because you saw a few memories, because you feel my annoyance, that you know me. You don't." Hermione stood up. She moved towards him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. It was the seesaw tilting, the repulsion of the afternoon giving way to a magnetic pull. "I know you're afraid," she said to his back. "I know you didn't want this, Mark." She glanced at his left forearm, hidden beneath his sleeve. Draco spun around. The movement was so fast she gasped. He pinned her with a look of such intense fury that she froze. But he didn't draw his wand. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, towering over her. "Fear," he hissed, leaning down until his face was inches from hers, "is what keeps you alive in this place. If you aren't afraid, Granger, you're stupid." "I am afraid," she whispered, refusing to back down. She could feel his breath on her face. She could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "But I'm not afraid of you." Something flickered in his expression. Doubt? Wonder? For a second, the tension shifted. It wasn't combat anymore. It was something else. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The air around them seemed to vibrate. The silence of the library screamed with unsaid words. He reached out. His hand hovered near her face. For a heart-stopping moment, Hermione thought he was going to touch her cheek. She found herself leaning into it, a subconscious plea for contact, for warmth in this cold stone world. His fingers brushed a stray curl of hair away from her temple. His touch was electric, sending a jolt straight to her toes. "You," he started, his voice barely a breath. Then the mask slammed back into place. The softness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a wall of ice. He snatched his hand back as if she were made of fire. "You have ink on your face," he sneered, his voice dripping with sudden artificial disdain. "Clean yourself up. You look pathetic." The rejection was physical. It was a slap. Hermione reeled back, the warmth in her chest turning instantly to ice. The emotional whiplash left her dizzy. "Malfoy." "We're done for tonight," he said coldly, turning away and grabbing his bag. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. "Keep your shield up, Granger. I don't want to feel your pathetic need for validation while I'm trying to sleep." He strode towards the exit, his strides long and purposeful. Hermione stood frozen by the window, the sound of the rain filling the silence he left behind. She touched her temple where his fingers had grazed her skin. It still tingled. She felt the bond hum. Beneath his cold anger, beneath the sneer and the insults, she felt something else radiating from him as he walked away. Regret. It was bitter and sharp, tasting like ash in her mouth. She watched the heavy oak doors swing shut behind him. The conflict was no longer just between them. It was within them. He was fighting a war against himself, and for a brief, dangerous moment, he had almost lost. Hermione wiped the spot of ink from her cheek. It was a lie. There was no ink. He had touched her because he wanted to, and he hated himself for it. She gathered her books, her hands shaking. The game had escalated. He had pushed her away, but in doing so, he had revealed just how close he was to breaking. The Obsidian Hall was not a classroom. It was an arena designed to break the spirit. The floor was made of polished black volcanic glass, reflective as a dark mirror, doubling the number of terrified students standing in the circle. The walls were lined with gargoyles that didn't just watch, they whispered. Low, sibilant hisses that fed on insecurity, amplifying every doubt in the room until the air itself felt heavy with dread. Hermione stood at the center of the ritual circle, her knees trembling. It was the third week of the Willpower and Dominance module. The task was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Cast a Patronus, then corrupt it. Turn the Guardian of Light into a Wraith of Shadow. It was a perversion of the highest order, a test of how much of one's own morality a student was willing to cannibalize for power. Begin! Professor Yaxley barked from the shadows. His voice was like grinding stones. Hermione raised her wand. Her arm felt like lead. She was exhausted. The bond with Draco was a constant, low-frequency hum in the back of her mind, a drain she hadn't anticipated. It was like leaving a window open in winter. Her heat was slowly seeping out, and his coldness was creeping in. Expecto Patronum, she whispered. The silver otter burst from her wand, bright and playful. It swam through the air, a beacon of pure, happy memories. Her parents, the smell of old books, the taste of toothpasting. "Corrupt it, Granger," Yaxley commanded, circling her like a shark. "Pour your pain into it. Make it hungry." Hermione squeezed her eyes shut. She had to do this. To fail was to be expelled, and expulsion from the academy meant a mind wipe. She had to survive. She reached into the dark corners of her mind. She pulled on the loneliness of the last 3 years. She pulled on the fear of the binding ritual. She pulled on the cold, biting rejection in Draco's eyes from the night before. Use the bond, a voice whispered in her head. It wasn't her voice. It was Draco's. She opened her eyes and looked across the room. He was leaning against a pillar, his face pale, his expression unreadable. But through the tether that connected their blood, she felt him. He wasn't mocking her. He was lending her something, a jagged, cold sliver of his own darkness. "Take it," the bond urged. "Do what you must." Hermione gasped as the foreign emotion hit her. It was heavy, suffocating, and incredibly powerful. She channeled it into her wand. "Obscuro!" she screamed. The silver otter shrieked. The light twisted, curdling into smoke. The playful creature elongated, its eyes turning glowing red, its body dissolving into a skeletal shadow that snapped its jaws at the air. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crept across the obsidian floor. It was done. She had created a monster. "Excellent," Yaxley purred, stepping closer. "Hold it. Control it." But Hermione couldn't hold it. The magic was too volatile, fueled by two conflicting souls. The shadow otter turned on her, a vortex of cold air swirling around the circle. Her vision blurred. The edges of the world began to grey out. The drain was catastrophic. She felt her knees give way. The floor rushed up to meet her. She didn't hit the stone. She hit something solid, warm, and smelling of cedar and rain. Impact. The world stopped spinning, anchored by the strong arms wrapped around her waist. Hermione blinked, trying to clear the black spots from her vision. She was half collapsed, her head resting against a chest that was heaving with exertion. She looked up. Draco was holding her up, his face inches from hers. He had moved across the room with supernatural speed. The shadow otter had vanished, dispelled by his mere presence, or perhaps he had banished it silently. For a moment, the academy didn't exist. Yaxley didn't exist. "Breathe," Draco commanded, his voice a low rumble against her ear. It wasn't a sneer. It was frantic. Hermione took a shuddering breath. She could feel his heart hammering against her own ribcage. Or was that the bond? The lines were blurred. He was terrified. Not for himself, but for her. His hand moved. It came up to her face, his thumb brushing away a trickle of blood that had escaped her nose. The gesture was shockingly intimate. His skin was cool, his touch gentle, almost reverent. He looked at the blood on his thumb, then back at her eyes, his expression crumbling. In that split second, Hermione saw him, the real him, the boy who was drowning in expectations, who hated the dark magic as much as she did, who had run across the room because he couldn't bear to watch her fall. The bond sang between them, a chord of pure, terrifying recognition. "I have you," it said. "I caught you." She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut, her body instinctively seeking his warmth. She parted her lips to speak, to say his name. "Mr. Malfoy." Yaxley's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "What is the meaning of this?" The spell broke. Hermione felt Draco stiffen. The warmth radiating from him vanished instantly, replaced by a wall of glacial ice. She opened her eyes to see the panic in his gaze, replaced by a shuttered, dead look. He saw Yaxley approaching. He saw the other students watching, the Slytherin elite, the judges, the wolves. He had exposed himself. He had shown weakness. He had shown care for a mudblood. He had to fix it. Draco's grip on her waist didn't loosen. It tightened, but now it was cruel. He shoved her away. It wasn't a gentle release. He pushed her hard enough that she stumbled back, catching herself on the obsidian floor, her hands scraping against the cold glass. The physical rejection was jarring, but the emotional one was a dagger to the heart. "Get off me," Draco snarled, his voice loud enough to echo through the hall. He wiped his hand on his robes, as if her blood were a contagion. Filthy little mudblood. Can't even handle a simple corruption spell without fainting like a damsel. Hermione froze, kneeling on the floor. The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. "She nearly vomited on my robes," Draco said, turning to Yaxley, his face twisted into a mask of perfect aristocratic disgust. "I was merely ensuring she didn't stain the floor, Professor. It's difficult to get mudblood stench out of obsidian." The class tittered. Nervous, cruel laughter rippled through the room. Yaxley paused, looking from Draco to Hermione. He narrowed his eyes, searching for a lie, but Draco's occlumency walls were fortress high. The disgust looked real. "Pathetic," Yaxley spat, looking down at Hermione. "Get up, Granger. 10 points from Gryffindor for weakness, and thank Mr. Malfoy for his sanitation efforts." Hermione pushed herself up. Her legs were shaking, but this time it wasn't from magical exhaustion. It was from rage. She looked at Draco. He was standing tall, his chin raised, looking down his nose at her with that familiar, hateful sneer. But the bond was screaming. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The words echoed in her head, a frantic mantra pulsing through the magical tether. He was projecting regret so potent it tasted like bile. He was mentally begging her to understand, to see the play, to realize that he had shoved her to save her from Yaxley's suspicion, that he had insulted her to keep his cover. But Hermione blocked it. She slammed her own mental walls up, severing the emotional feed. She couldn't handle the dissonance. She couldn't handle the feeling of his gentle thumb on her cheek, moments before he called her filth. It was too much. The seesaw had tipped too violently, and she had fallen off. "Thank you, Malfoy," she said, her voice dead and hollow. She didn't look at him. She stared at the button on his chest. "I'll try not to be such a burden next time." She turned and walked back to her spot in the circle, her head held high, her dignity wrapped around her like a shield. Draco stood frozen. Outwardly, he rolled his eyes and turned back to his friends, laughing at a joke not made. But inwardly, Hermione could feel the change. He was cold. Not the cold of indifference, but the absolute zero of devastation. He had hurt her to save her, and the victory tasted like ash. Later that evening, the tension in the castle was palpable. The storm outside had intensified, thunder rattling the window panes. Hermione sat in the common room, staring into the dying fire. She felt hollowed out. The best student of the academy felt like a fraud. She had used dark magic. She had liked the feeling of Draco's arms around her, and she had been humiliated for it. Why does it hurt? She asked herself. He is what he is. You knew this, but she remembered the look in his eyes right before the mask slammed down. That terrified vulnerability. She stood up, needing air. She couldn't breathe in the tower. She needed to walk. Her feet took her to the astronomy tower. It was out of bounds, but she didn't care. She needed the wind. She climbed the spiral stairs, the cold air biting at her exposed skin. When she reached the top, the wind whipped her hair across her face. The view was breathtakingly bleak. Dark mountains, dark forest, dark sky. She wasn't alone. A figure stood by the parapet, looking out at the storm. The moonlight caught the platinum of his hair. Draco. Hermione stopped. Her first instinct was to turn and leave, to preserve what little pride she had left. But the bond held her there. It was pulling at her, a physical ache in the center of her chest. He didn't turn around. He knew she was there. "You're blocking me," he said. His voice was snatched away by the wind, but she heard it. "I don't want to feel you," Hermione replied, stepping into the alcove, staying out of the rain but keeping her distance. "I don't want your pity, and I certainly don't want your apologies inside my head while you eviscerate me with your mouth." Draco turned slowly. He looked wrecked. The perfect uniform was disheveled, his tie loose, his hair windblown. The mask was gone. "I had to," he said simply. "Did you?" Hermione challenged, her voice rising. "Did you have to call me that? Did you have to shove me?" "Yaxley was watching," Draco said, taking a step toward her. "If he thought for 1 second that I cared, that we were connected, do you know what he would do? He would tear your mind apart looking for the reason. He would see the ritual. He would see the bond." "So you protected yourself," she spat. "I protected you," he shouted back, the sound startling even the wind. He closed the distance between them, his anger flaring, hot and desperate. "You don't get it, do you? You think this is a game? You think because you're the smartest witch of your age that you can survive this place with your morals intact? You can't. They will break you, Granger. And if they see a crack, if they see me as your crack, they will shatter you just to spite me." He stopped inches from her. He was breathing hard, his eyes wild. "I insulted you because it's the only language they understand. I pushed you away because if I held you for 1 second longer..." He trailed off, his voice breaking. "If you held me for 1 second longer," Hermione whispered, the anger draining out of her, replaced by a trembling anticipation. Draco looked down at her. The rain lashed against the stone roof, but in the shelter of the tower, it was just them and the heavy electric silence. "If I held you for a second longer," he confessed, his voice barely audible, "I wouldn't have been able to let go." Hermione's breath hitched. The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying. It was an admission of defeat. He was admitting that she wasn't just a rival, she was his weakness. He reached out, his hand hovering near her waist, exactly where he had held her in the classroom. He didn't touch her. He let the heat of his hand radiate through the layers of her clothes. "I hated it," he whispered. "I hated saying those words to you. I felt your pain when I said them. It burned me." Hermione looked up into his grey eyes, seeing the storm inside him. The seesaw tipped again. The coldness of the afternoon melted into a scorching, dangerous heat. "Draco," she breathed. It was the first time she had said his given name aloud. The sound of it seemed to snap something inside him. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. He closed his eyes. "Don't make me save you again," he murmured against her skin. "I'm not a hero, Granger. I can't be good for you." "I didn't ask you to be good," she whispered back, her hands finding the lapels of his cloak, gripping the fabric to steady herself. "I just asked you to be real." He pulled back slightly, looking at her with a mixture of hunger and despair. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The air was charged with it, the inevitability of it. But then, the clock tower began to toll. Midnight. Draco flinched. The reality of the academy rushed back in. He stepped back, the loss of his warmth leaving her shivering. He fixed his tie, smoothing his features back into the mask of the Malfoy heir. "Go to bed, Granger," he said, his voice rough. "And put up your shields. You're broadcasting your feelings again." "And what am I broadcasting?" she asked, daring him to say it. He looked at her one last time before heading to the stairs. "Hope," he said, the words sounding like a curse. "Get rid of it. It'll get us both killed." He descended into the darkness, leaving Hermione alone in the wind. But as she stood there, touching her forehead where his had rested, she realized he was wrong. It wasn't hope she was broadcasting. It was desire. And as the bond hummed to life in the silence, she felt a terrifying echo from him as he walked away. He wanted it too. The silence in the academy had changed texture. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of discipline. It was the vibrating, high-pitched silence of hysteria. Final exams were not merely tests of knowledge at the institute. They were the culling. The bottom 10% of the class did not return next semester. They vanished, sent to the colonies, a euphemism that made the blood of every scholarship student run cold. But the top student received the Archmage's favor. It was the highest honor a guaranteed position in the inner circle, and a magical boon of unknown power. Hermione Granger intended to win. For 3 days, she had lived on pepper-up potions and sheer spite. She moved through the corridors like a ghost, her eyes burning with exhaustion, her mind a fortress of facts and counter-curses. The bond with Draco had gone quiet. It was a suspicious, brooding silence, like the air before a tornado touches down. Since the night on the astronomy tower, he had avoided her. She saw him only in passing, a flash of platinum hair, the sweep of a black cloak, and felt only a dull, walled-off ache in her chest where their connection lay. He was occluding. He was shutting her out. Good, she told herself, slicing through the stem of a shrivel fig in Greenhouse 4. Good. I don't need his guilt. I don't need his darkness. The greenhouse was humid and suffocating, smelling of damp earth, fertilizer, and the sweet, rotting scent of carnivorous blooms. It was late, the moon obscured by the eternal grey clouds. Hermione was alone, or so she thought, until the heavy iron door creaked open. She didn't turn around. She knew the cadence of those footsteps. Draco moved through the rows of snapping plants, ignoring the venomous tentacula that reached for his robes. He stopped at the end of her workbench. He looked worse than she felt. The pristine facade of the Malfoy heir was cracking. His tie was askew, his top button undone, and his eyes were rimmed with red, the grey irises dull and stormy. "You're going to kill that plant," he said, his voice rough. Hermione paused, her knife hovering over the root. "I'm extracting the juice, Malfoy. Precision is key." "You're shaking," he observed. "I'm caffeinated," she corrected, finally looking at him. "What do you want? If you're here to sabotage my potion, you're wasting your time. I brewed the final draft an hour ago." Draco let out a short, humorless laugh. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking, filling with the scent of ozone and agitation. "Sabotage," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Is that what you think this is?" "We are rivals," Hermione stated, her voice clipped. "The exams are tomorrow. You want the favor. I am the only one standing in your way." "The favor," he repeated, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her tired face, the ink stains on her fingers, the defiant set of her jaw. "Do you even know what it is, Granger? Or are you just chasing the shiny gold star like a good little mudblood?" Hermione slammed the knife down. The sound echoed in the glass structure. "Don't," she warned. "Don't start with the slurs. I know you don't mean them anymore." "Don't I?" He stepped into her personal space, looming over her. The bond suddenly flared to life, a spike of sharp, jagged panic that hit Hermione in the solar plexus. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. "I'm here to give you a warning," Draco said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Fail." Hermione blinked. "Excuse me?" "The exam tomorrow, the practical application of mind arts. Fail it." His eyes bore into hers, desperate and intense. "Mispronounce the incantation. Drop your wand. I don't care how you do it. Just make sure you don't rank first." Hermione stared at him, incredulity warring with anger. "You want me to throw the exam so you can win?" "I don't care about winning," he hissed, grabbing the edge of the workbench, his knuckles white. "I care about what happens to the winner." "And what happens, Draco?" She used his name like a weapon, seeing him flinch. "Glory? Power? Recognition? Everything your father paid for you to have, but you can't quite grasp because I'm better than you. You think this is about jealousy? He looked incredulous. He reached out, grabbing her wrist, his fingers circling the delicate bones. His touch was hot, feverish. Granger, look at me. Use the damn bond. Feel me. She hesitated. She didn't want to. Opening her mind to him was dangerous. It made her soft. But his desperation was a physical weight in the room. She lowered her shields, just a fraction. Cold. Darkness, a screaming void, an image of a golden cage, a bird with its wings clipped, bleeding, a sense of overwhelming nausea. She gasped, pulling her wrist back. He let her go instantly. "What is that?" she whispered. "The price," he said grimly. "The Academy doesn't give power away. It harvests it. The favor isn't a prize, it's a conscription. The top student is utilized." "Utilized how?" "I can't tell you," he said, frustration bleeding into his tone. "The vow prevents me from speaking the specifics. But you cannot be first. Let not take it. Let me take it. Just stay down." Hermione studied him. Her heart was racing. The bond told her he believed what he was saying. But her logic, the logic that had kept her alive, the logic the Academy prized above all else, rebelled. "You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for," she said slowly. "My safety here depends on my value. If I am not the best, I am disposable. You know that. The bottom 10%. "You won't be in the bottom," he interrupted. "Just be second. Be third. Be invisible, Granger. For once in your life, stop trying to prove you're worthy of this rot." "I am not doing it for the Academy," she shouted back, her control snapping. "I am doing it because it is the only thing I have. I don't have a manor, Malfoy. I don't have a bloodline to protect me. All I have is my mind. And you want me to dull it. You want me to play dumb. I want you to survive," he roared. The silence that followed was deafening. The plants seemed to lean in, listening. Draco was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked devastated. He looked like a man who was watching a train crash in slow motion and couldn't reach the brake. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You think you're fighting for your place, but you're walking into a slaughterhouse." Hermione stepped back, putting the workbench between them. She felt a profound sadness radiating from him, but beneath it, she felt her own stubborn pride hardening like diamond. "I can't trust you," she said, her voice shaking. "I want to. God, Draco, I want to. But every time I get close, you push me away. Every time I think we're on the same side, you remind me of the hierarchy. How do I know this isn't just another game? How do I know you're not just trying to ensure the Malfoy name stays on top?" Draco looked at her, and the light seemed to go out of his eyes. He realized he couldn't win. He couldn't break through the walls of mistrust his family and he himself had spent years building. "You don't," he said hollowly. "You don't know." He straightened up, fixing his jacket with trembling hands. The mask was sliding back into place, but it was crooked now, ill-fitting. "Fine," he said, his voice cold and flat. "Be the best, Granger. Win the prize. Stand on the podium." He looked at her with a gaze so filled with preemptive grief that it chilled her to the bone. "But when they come to collect, don't look for me. I can't watch it happen." "I won't need you to watch," she said, lifting her chin. "I can handle myself." "That," he murmured, turning to the door, "is the greatest lie you've ever told." He walked away, leaving the heavy door swinging on its hinges. Hermione stood alone in the humid dark. Her victory felt assured. She knew the material. She was faster, sharper, stronger. She would win tomorrow. But as the bond faded into a dull, throbbing ache of resignation from his side, she didn't feel like a winner. She felt like a child who had just let go of the only hand reaching out to save her in the dark. The great hall was transformed. The long tables were gone, replaced by a single elevated dueling platform in the center. The stained glass windows were blocked, plunging the room into torchlit gloom. It was the ranking ceremony. The entire student body watched from the shadows of the mezzanine. Only the top 5 students stood on the floor. Hermione stood at position 1. Draco stood at position 2. He wouldn't look at her. He stood like a statue, pale and rigid, his eyes fixed on the headmaster, who sat upon a throne of twisted black iron. "The final test," Headmaster Crouch announced, his voice amplified by magic, booming through the hall, "is not of skill, but of capacity. We have measured your spell work. We have tested your potions. Now we test your sacrifice." Hermione's stomach twisted. Sacrifice? "To lead," Crouch continued, "one must be willing to give. Step forward, Miss Granger." Hermione stepped onto the platform. The spotlight blinded her. She felt the eyes of hundreds upon her. She felt the heavy, suffocating silence of the room. "You are the highest-ranked student of this generation," Crouch said smoothly. "Perfect scores, flawless execution. Do you accept the burden of the Archmage's favor?" "I do," Hermione said, her voice ringing clear. She glanced at Draco. He was looking at the floor, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The bond was dead silent. He had completely severed the connection. It terrified her more than any scream. "Then receive your reward," Crouch smiled. A pedestal rose from the floor. On it sat a basin, a pensive, but the liquid inside was not silver, it was black. "The Academy requires fuel," Crouch explained, his voice conversational, almost fatherly. "Great magic requires great emotion. To ascend to the inner circle, you must tithe your most potent memory. Not a sad one, Miss Granger. Pain is cheap. We require joy." Hermione froze. "A happy memory," she whispered. "The happiest," Crouch corrected. "The memory that anchors you. The memory that gives you hope. We will extract it. It will be consumed to power the wards of the Institute for another year. You will never remember it again. You will remember the fact of it, perhaps, but the feeling, the warmth, will be gone forever." The crowd murmured. This was the secret. This was the price. Hermione's heart stopped. She thought of her parents. She thought of the day she got her letter. She thought of, unbidden, a memory surfaced. Not from her childhood. Rain, a stone tower, grey eyes softening, the feeling of a thumb brushing her cheek, the feeling of being seen, the feeling of not being alone. "If I held you for a second longer, I wouldn't have been able to let go." That was it. That was her happiest memory. The moment she realized she could be loved by him. And they wanted to take it. They wanted to eat it. She looked at Draco. He was looking at her now. His face was a mask of agony. He knew. He had known all along. This was why he told her to fail. He wanted to save her memories. He wanted to save her. Fail. His eyes begged her across the room. Refuse. But she couldn't. If she refused, she was a traitor. She would be expelled, mind-wiped, destroyed. If she accepted, she lost the only thing that made the cold bearable. She was trapped. Hermione started, her voice trembling. "Do you hesitate?" Crouch asked, his voice sharpening. "Is your dedication to the Academy faltering, Miss Granger?" "No," she said quickly. Tears pricked her eyes. She looked at Draco one last time. "Forgive me," she projected toward him, smashing against his mental walls. "I didn't know." She saw him flinch. He closed his eyes, turning his head away. He couldn't watch. Hermione stepped up to the basin. She placed the tip of her wand to her temple. She focused on the memory, the rain, the smell of cedar, the warmth of his chest, the exquisite, terrifying hope. She pulled. A silver gold strand clung to her wand. It was beautiful. It pulsed with light in the dark hall. "Excellent," Crouch whispered greedily. With a sob she couldn't suppress, Hermione shook the strand into the black liquid. The basin hissed. The black water swirled, devouring the light. The gold dissolved, turning into grey smoke that rose up and was absorbed into the iron throne. And in her mind, the light went out. She stood there, blinking. She felt lighter, colder. She looked across the platform. There was a blonde boy standing there, Draco Malfoy, her rival. She knew she had just looked at him. She knew they had shared a moment on a tower. She remembered the facts. It was raining. He was there. They spoke. But why had it mattered? She searched for the feeling, the flutter in her stomach, the warmth. Nothing. It was just a fact, a dry, dusty sentence in a history book. We talked on the tower. It meant nothing. Hermione straightened her spine. She wiped the tear from her cheek, confused as to why it was there. She turned to Headmaster Crouch. "It is done," she said, her voice devoid of tremor. "Welcome to the elite, Miss Granger." Crouch smiled. As the applause broke out, polite and muted, Hermione walked off the platform. She passed Draco. He didn't look at her. He was staring at the black basin with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. His hands were shaking so hard he had to grip his robes to hide it. Hermione felt a strange flicker in her chest, a ghost of a sensation, a bond. She frowned, touching her sternum. It felt like someone was screaming in the distance, muffled by thick walls. Why is he so upset? She wondered calmly. It's just a memory. She kept walking, her steps echoing on the stone, perfect and hollow. She had won. She was the best, and she felt absolutely nothing. Winter arrived at the academy not as a season, but as a verdict. The windows of the castle frosted over with patterns that looked suspiciously like skeletal hands, and the corridors turned into wind tunnels of biting cold. But Hermione Granger did not feel the chill. Since the ranking ceremony, she felt very little at all. She moved through the days with the terrifying precision of a clockwork mechanism. Her essays were flawless, her spellwork brutal in its efficiency, her posture impeccable. The Archmage's favor had granted her access to the teacher's lounge, the restricted section without a pass, and a private study. It was everything she had wanted. It was sterile. She sat in the great hall, cutting her toast into 4 perfect triangles. The bond, the magical tether that connected her to Draco Malfoy, was still there, but it had changed. Before, it had been a live wire, humming with his anxiety, his arrogance, his hidden fears. Now, it felt like a scar, thick, numb tissue. Occasionally, she would feel a dull throb of sensation from his end, a spike of jagged, hot anger, or a wave of crushing despair. But it felt distant, like a shout heard from underwater. She looked up. Draco was watching her. He had lost weight. His cheekbones were sharp enough to cut, and the shadows under his eyes were dark bruises against his pale skin. He wasn't eating. He was staring at her with a morbid fascination, like a man watching a beautiful painting burn. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. He projected something down the bond. "Do you feel anything?" Hermione paused, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. She analyzed the question. Did she? She felt the temperature of the room. She felt the texture of the bread. She felt the satisfaction of being top of the class. "I feel adequate," she projected back, her mental voice cool and disciplined. Draco flinched visibly. He dropped his gaze to his plate, his hand curling into a fist. The connection snapped shut as he raised his occlumency shields, plunging her back into her comfortable, silent isolation. She didn't understand why he was so dramatic. She had done what was necessary. She was the best. The memory she had given up, some rainy night, a conversation about weakness, was a small price for this clarity. Logic was a straight line. Emotions were a messy scribble. She preferred the line. That night, the logic began to fray. Hermione was in her private study, analyzing the ward schematics of the academy for her independent study project. The favor allowed her to see the magical ley lines that powered the castle. She traced the ink lines on the parchment. The magic flowed from the earth, up through the foundations, and into the... She frowned. The lines didn't stop at the wards. They funneled into a central point in the West Wing, the sealed section of the castle that had been bricked up for a century. According to the official history, the West Wing was unstable, but the map showed it as the heart of the Academy's power grid, and the fuel source wasn't ambient magic. The energy signature was distinct. It pulsed. It had a flavor. It looked like the golden smoke she had seen in the pensive. Memories. Hermione's analytical mind latched onto the discrepancy. If the memories were consumed to power the wards, why were they being stored? And why in such vast quantities? The math didn't add up. The input exceeded the output by a factor of 10. Curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked her. It wasn't a passionate need for truth. It was the annoyance of a mathematician seeing an unbalanced equation. She stood up, casting a disillusionment charm over herself. She needed to see the variables. The entrance to the West Wing was hidden behind a tapestry of a wizard flaying a dragon. Hermione found the hidden latch, a stone carved like a serpent's eye, and pressed it. The wall groaned and slid aside. The air that rushed out was stale and smelled of ozone and rot. Sweet, cloying rot. Hermione stepped into the darkness, lighting her wand with a muted lumos. The corridor was lined with dust, but the floor was clean. Someone came here often. She followed the hum of magic. It grew louder, a vibrating pressure that made her teeth ache. She descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go down into the very roots of the mountain. At the bottom, she found a door. It was massive, made of iron and inscribed with runes that made her eyes water. They were binding runes, slave markings. She pushed the door open. It wasn't a room. It was a cathedral. The ceiling vanished into shadow, but the floor was filled with rows and rows of glass pillars. Inside each pillar, a golden silver substance swirled, glowing with a soft, pulsing light. Thousands of them. Hermione walked down the central aisle, her wand light reflecting off the glass. She stopped at the nearest pillar. There was a plaque at the base. Subject 452. Year 1894. Submission. Love for Mother. She moved to the next. Subject 890. Year 1920. Submission, first kiss. She walked faster, scanning the dates. They were recent. Subject 2024. Submission, hope. She stopped. This was it. The Archmage's favor. It wasn't a tax. It was a harvest. They weren't burning the memories to protect the school. They were hoarding them. It's beautiful, isn't it? The voice came from the shadows behind the furthest pillar. Hermione spun around, her wand raised instantly. Stupid. Don't. Draco stepped into the light. He held his hands up, palms open. He wasn't wearing his school robes. He was wearing a fitted black suit, high-collared and severe. He looked like the prince of this dark kingdom. Malfoy, she said, her voice steady. You knew about this. I am a Malfoy, he replied, his voice devoid of its usual mockery. My great-grandfather built this wing. My father maintains it. And he gestured to the rows of glowing pillars. I am the heir to the graveyard. They aren't being consumed, Hermione stated, lowering her wand slightly, but keeping it trained on his chest. The headmaster lied. Why? Draco walked towards her. He moved differently here. He didn't slouch. He moved with the heavy grace of someone walking through a crypt he owned. Because raw emotion is the purest form of magic, he said softly. And happy memories? They are nuclear. The headmaster doesn't use them for wards, Granger. He uses them to extend his own life, to amplify his power. He eats them like candy. He stopped a few feet from her, looking at the pillar next to her. And you, he whispered, looking at her with a devastating sadness. You just fed him the best part of yourself. Hermione looked at the pillar. She felt a flicker of something. Confusion. It was a transaction, she said defensively. I gave a memory. I received status. You received a lobotomy. Draco's voice rose, echoing in the vast chamber. The anger cracked his calm facade. Don't you feel it? The hole in your chest. Don't you miss it? Miss what? She asked, genuinely unable to grasp the concept. I remember the event, Draco. We were on the tower. You were upset. It rained. I remember the facts. Facts, he spat. He stepped closer, invading her space. Do you remember how your heart beat? Do you remember how the cold air felt on your skin when I leaned in? Do you remember the pull? No, she said simply. That is irrelevant data. Draco stared at her, and his expression shattered. It was the look of a man who realizes the person he loves is a ghost. It's not irrelevant, he choked out. It was everything. He reached out and grabbed her shoulders. His grip was hard, desperate. The bond flared, a supernova of pain transferring from him to her. Grief. Absolute, blinding grief. He was mourning her while she was still standing there. He was screaming in a silent room. Hermione gasped. The influx of foreign emotion was shocking. It pierced through her numbness like a hot needle. Stop it, she hissed, trying to pull away. You're hurting me. Good, he shouted, shaking her. Feel it. If you can't feel your own emotions, feel mine. Hate me, Granger. Be disgusted. Just feel something other than that cold, dead logic. Why do you care? She yelled back, the volume of her own voice surprising her. The mask of perfection slipped. Why does it matter to you if I'm cold? We are rivals. We are enemies. We were never enemies, Draco roared. He slammed her back against the glass pillar. The impact was jarring. The golden light from the memory vat behind her illuminated his face, twisted, beautiful, and desperate. We were drowning in the same ocean, he whispered, his voice breaking. And I thought I thought for a moment I had found someone who could swim with me. He leaned his forehead against hers, just like he had that night on the tower. But this time, she didn't melt. She stood stiffly, analyzing the contact. His skin was hot. His pulse was rapid. "I tried to warn you," he murmured against her skin. "I told you to fail. I wanted to save you from this." "You wanted to save a memory," she corrected him. "I wanted to save us," he said. The word hung in the air. Us. Hermione's mind raced. Us implied a unit. Us implied a variable she hadn't calculated. "Draco," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Where is it?" He pulled back, looking into her eyes. "Where is what?" "My memory," she said. "If they store them, where is mine?" Draco froze. He looked at the vast sea of pillars. A slow, dangerous realization dawned on his face. "The intake room," he said. "It hasn't been filed yet. It would still be in the processing antechamber." "If I get it back," Hermione said, her mind working furiously, calculating probabilities. "Can I restore it?" "It's forbidden," Draco warned. "To steal from the Archmage is treason. It's death." "I am already dead, according to you," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I am a husk, a computer made of flesh." She looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, a spark of the old Hermione, the reckless Gryffindor fire, flickered in her brown eyes. "I don't like being a variable in someone else's equation, Draco. I want my data back." Draco stared at her. Slowly, a smirk curled the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the cruel sneer of the bully. It was the sharp, dangerous grin of a partner in crime. "You're insane," he said admiringly. "I'm efficient," she countered. "Are you going to help me, or are you going to stand there brooding?" Draco stepped back, smoothing his suit jacket. The despair in his eyes hardened into resolve. The bond shifted again. The grief vanished, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp focus that matched her own. "The intake room is guarded by blood wards," he said. "Only a Malfoy can open them without triggering the alarm." He extended his hand. "Come with me, Granger. Let's go steal your soul back." Hermione looked at his hand. Logic dictated she report him. Logic dictated she return to her dorm. But the bond was humming, not with pain, but with adrenaline. She took his hand. "Lead the way, Malfoy." As their fingers interlaced, the contact didn't burn. It clicked, like a key turning in a lock. They moved together into the deeper shadows of the West Wing. No longer two students fighting for a prize, but two halves of a weapon aimed at the heart of the academy. The descent into the belly of the academy was a journey through the anatomy of a beast. The corridors of the West Wing were not merely old, they were ancient, hewn from the living rock of the mountain before the castle was ever razed. The air here was heavy, pressing against the skin with a damp, metallic weight that tasted of iron and old blood. Hermione walked beside Draco, their footsteps silent thanks to a muffling charm he had cast without a word. Her hand was still in his. It was a tactical necessity, she told herself. He was the key. She was the observer. But even through the haze of her emotional numbness, she noted the texture of his palm, calloused from broom handles and wand grips, yet strangely gentle. His pulse beat against her own, a frantic, steady rhythm that contradicted the stony calm of his face. They stopped before a heavy door made of dark ironwood, veins of silver pulsing through the grain like a nervous system. "The Blood Ward," Draco whispered, his voice barely disturbing the stagnant air. "It recognizes only the genetic signature of the Founder's lines." He let go of her hand. The loss of contact registered in Hermione's mind as a drop in temperature, a data point she filed away. Draco drew a silver dagger from his boot. He didn't hesitate. He sliced a thin line across his palm, wincing slightly as the crimson welled up. He pressed his bleeding hand against the center of the door. The wood hissed. The silver veins turned a violent, glowing red. The magic in the air spiked, a taste of ozone and rot, and the heavy lock groaned open. Wasteful, Hermione critiqued, watching him wrap a handkerchief around his hand. A simple biometric scanner would be more efficient. Draco looked at her, his grey eyes darkened by the shadows. Magic requires a price, Granger. You of all people should know that by now. He pushed the door open. The intake room was not grand like the Cathedral of Pillars. It was clinical. It looked like a morgue. Stone slabs lined the walls, and floating above each one were silver basins, holding tanks for the fresh harvests. Hermione moved into the room, her eyes scanning the labels with ruthless efficiency. Subject 304. Fear. Subject 305. Ambition. Here, Draco called out from the far end of the room. She walked towards him. He was standing in front of a small, solitary basin. Floating inside was a single strand of memory, glowing with a soft, heartbreaking gold. It looked fragile, swirling in the darkness like a trapped star. Subject: H. Granger. Classification: Joy. Hermione stared at it. It was just a wisp of smoke. It seemed impossible that such a small thing could be the missing variable in her equation. "Take it," Draco urged, glancing at the door. "We don't have much time. The patrol shift changes in 7 minutes." Hermione reached out. Her fingers brushed the cool surface of the memory. She hesitated. "If I take this," she said, her voice echoing in the cold room, "I become vulnerable again. I become inefficient." "You become human," Draco hissed. He stepped closer, his urgency radiating through the bond. "Granger, look at me. You're not a machine. You're the brightest witch of the age because you care. Without that passion, you're just a highly advanced calculator. Is that what you want? To be a tool for them to use until you break?" Hermione looked from the glowing strand to Draco's face. She saw the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't trying to sabotage her. He was trying to resurrect her. Logic faltered. Curiosity took over. She plunged her hand into the basin. She grabbed the strand of light. It felt like grabbing a live wire. She didn't need a wand. She brought the glowing wisp to her temple and pressed it against her skin. Impact. It wasn't a gentle return. It was a collision. The memory didn't just play. It exploded. Rain. The smell of ozone. The rough stone of the parapet under her hands. The sight of Draco standing there, looking broken. The way his voice cracked when he said, "I wouldn't have been able to let go." But it wasn't just the facts returning. It was the feeling, the sudden, crushing weight of hope, the terrifying flutter in her stomach, the heat that had bloomed in her chest, hot and sweet and undeniable, the realization that she wasn't alone, the realization that he saw her, and then the grief. The grief of the last few weeks crashed into her like a tidal wave. The coldness, the cruelty, the loneliness, it all hit her at once, thawed in a nanosecond by the heat of the returning soul. Hermione gasped, a ragged, wet sound. Her knees buckled. "I've got you!" Draco was there. He caught her before she hit the stone floor, his arms wrapping tight around her, pulling her into his chest. She was shaking, violently. She clutched his lapels, burying her face in his suit jacket, gasping for air as tears, Hot, burning tears spilled from her eyes. The dam had broken. "It hurts," she sobbed, the words tearing from her throat. "Draco, it hurts." "I know," he whispered, his hand cradling the back of her head, pressing her closer. "I know. Breathe. Just breathe." He lowered them both to the floor, leaning back against the stone slab, pulling her into his lap. He wrapped his cloak around her, cocooning her against the cold of the room and the cold of the world. For a long time, there was only the sound of her weeping and his steady breathing. He rocked her slightly, a rhythmic, soothing motion. Through the bond, the walls were down. She felt his immense relief washing over her like a warm tide. She felt his fierce protectiveness, a jagged shield erected around them. Slowly, the storm subsided. The sobbing turned to shuddering breaths. Hermione lay against him, exhausted, her cheek resting on his chest. She could hear his heart beating, fast, strong, real. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice raw. "I fixed my mistake," he murmured, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I should never have let you do it." Hermione pulled back slightly, looking up at him. His face was pale in the dim light of the memory basins, but his eyes were clear. There was no mask now, just him. "Why?" she asked. "Why take the risk? You're a Malfoy. You're safe. Why burn your world down for a mudblood?" Draco flinched at the word, his hand tightening on her arm. "Don't use that word," he said quietly. "Not anymore." He looked at the door, then back at her. The silence stretched, heavy and intimate. "Because the world is grey, Granger," he said. "Everything in this castle is grey. The stone, the sky, the morality. We are taught that power is the only colour." He reached up, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, a touch so hesitant it made her breath hitch. "But you? You were vivid. You were so irritatingly, brightly alive. You fought for house elves. You corrected teachers. You burned with this righteous golden fire." He leaned in closer, his eyes searching hers. "When you looked at me on the tower, when you looked at me like I was something worth saving, it was the first time I felt warm in 17 years. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I couldn't watch that light go out. I would rather burn the academy to the ground than see you become one of them." Hermione stared at him. The revelation settled in her chest, warm and terrifying. He hadn't just saved her memory. He had saved her, and in doing so, he had handed her the weapon to destroy him. "Draco," she breathed. She moved. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was magnetic. She lifted her face. He froze, his breath hitching. She kissed him. It wasn't the tentative, shy kiss of a schoolgirl. It was desperate. It tasted of salt tears, iron blood, and the electric ozone of dark magic. It was a collision of two people who had been starving. Draco hesitated for a fraction of a second, a last, desperate attempt at self-preservation, and then he broke. He groaned low in his throat and kissed her back. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her deeper. His mouth was hot, demanding, devouring. He kissed her like he was drowning, and she was air. The bond exploded. There were no walls now. Hermione felt everything. She felt his hunger, sharp and jagged. She felt his fear, a cold undercurrent. She felt his love. Yes, love, terrified and reluctant and overwhelming, pouring into her. And he felt hers. The gratitude, the desire, the fierce, stubborn determination to never let him go. They were fused. Mind, body, magic. The air around them crackled, the silver basins vibrating with the resonance of their combined power. "Draco," she gasped against his mouth, her hands gripping his shoulders. "We have to leave. The patrol." He pulled back, breathless, his lips swollen and red, his eyes blown wide and dark. He looked at her as if he had never seen her before. "Right," he choked out. "Patrol." He stood up, pulling her with him. He was unsteady, shaken by the intensity of what had just happened. He fixed his suit, but his hands were trembling. "We need a safe house," he said, his voice regaining some of its tactical edge, though it was rougher now. "We can't go back to the dorms. The headmaster, if he checks the logs, he'll know the memory is gone." "Where?" Hermione asked, her mind racing, the old sharp logic working in tandem with her returned passion. "The room of requirement is monitored." "The Chamber of Secrets," Draco said. Hermione blinked. "You're joking." "My father thinks the heir is long gone," Draco said, moving towards the door, pulling her along. "No one monitors the pipes. It's the only place the wards don't reach." They reached the door. Draco paused, his hand on the handle. He turned to her. The seesaw tipped again. The heat of the kiss faded into the cold reality of their situation. "Granger," he said, his face serious. "Once we step out of this room, we are traitors. There is no going back. You lose your prefect status. You lose your future. You become a fugitive." "I lost my future the moment I signed up for this academy," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm just taking it back." Draco stared at her, a flicker of awe in his eyes. He nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then stay behind me, and don't let go." He opened the door, but they didn't step into an empty corridor. Standing in the shadows of the hallway, illuminated only by the tip of a wand, was a figure, tall, thin, wearing robes of midnight blue. Professor Snape. Hermione's heart stopped. The bond screamed with Draco's sudden spike of terror. Snape didn't attack. He stood there, his black eyes glittering in the wand light, moving from Draco's bleeding hand to Hermione's tear-stained face, and finally to their joined hands. "How touching," Snape drawled, his voice silky and dangerous. "Romeo and Juliet in the crypt." Draco stepped in front of Hermione, shielding her. "Professor, I can explain." "Explain?" Snape raised an eyebrow. "Explain why the top 2 students of the academy are raiding the Archmage's private reserves. Explain why the Malfoy heir is bleeding on the floor." He took a step forward. Draco raised his wand. "Don't," Snape warned, his voice dropping an octave. "You are good, Draco, but you are not that good." "I won't let you take her," Draco snarled. The darkness in him flared. Not the cold darkness of the academy, but a protective, feral darkness. Snape paused. He looked at Draco's wand, aiming steadily at his teacher's heart. Then he looked at Hermione. He seemed to be weighing something, calculating. "The headmaster is currently dining with the Minister of Magic," Snape said softly. "He will return in 1 hour. The shift change for the West Wing guards is in 90 seconds. Hermione frowned. This wasn't an arrest. "Professor," she whispered. Snape lowered his wand. "The chamber is damp," he said, his lip curling in distaste. "And the basilisk carcass reeks. I would suggest the shrieking shack. The tunnel under the willow is still functional." Draco lowered his wand slowly, confusion warring with suspicion. "Why?" Snape looked at Draco, and for a brief second the mask of the dungeon bat slipped. Hermione saw something ancient and weary in his eyes. Regret. "Because," Snape said, turning his back on them, "I once knew a witch who was vividly alive, and I watched her light go out. I do not wish to see history repeat itself." He began to walk away, his cloak billowing. "Go," he threw over his shoulder, "before I remember my loyalty to your father, Draco." Draco didn't waste a second. He grabbed Hermione's hand. "Run," he breathed. They ran. They sprinted through the dark corridors, their footsteps echoing like heartbeats. They ran past the tapestries, past the portraits that screamed at them, past the life they had known. They burst out into the night air. The rain was falling again, cold and cleansing. They scrambled down the wet grass towards the whomping willow. As they slid into the mud of the tunnel entrance, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone, Hermione looked at Draco. He was covered in mud, his hair plastered to his skull, his fine suit ruined. He looked wild. He looked at her and grinned. It was a breathless, terrified, exhilarating grin. "We're in so much trouble," he panted. "Statistically," Hermione gasped, wiping mud from her eyes, "we are doomed." She laughed. It was a hysterical, jagged sound, but it was real. Draco grabbed the back of her neck and pulled her forehead to his. "Then let's make it worth it," he whispered. The tunnel swallowed them, leading them away from the castle, away from the order and into the chaos of freedom. But in the dark, the bond between them burned bright, no longer a tether of pain, but a lifeline of gold. The shrieking shack smelled of abandonment. It was a scent composed of dry rot, ancient dust, and the lingering phantom echo of a wolf's howl. Hermione collapsed onto the floorboards the moment they cleared the trapdoor. Her lungs were burning, her legs turning to jelly as the adrenaline that had carried her from the castle finally evaporated. Beside her, Draco slid down the peeling wallpaper of the wall, his head thumping back against the wood, his eyes closing. For a long moment there was no sound but the storm raging outside, the wind battering the boarded-up windows, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof. Hermione lay on her back, staring up at the cracks in the ceiling. She felt everything. After weeks of the Academy's induced numbness, the return of her emotions was a physical assault. She felt the rough wood under her fingers. She felt the cold dampness of her soaked robes. She felt the terrified pounding of her heart. But mostly, she felt him. The bond was no longer a thread. It was a torrent. She could feel the sharp, throbbing pain in Draco's hand where he had sliced it for the blood ward. She could feel a crushing wave of guilt that was so heavy it made her own chest ache. And beneath that, a frantic, vibrating need to check if she was safe. She sat up, wincing as her muscles protested. Draco. He didn't open his eyes. He looked like a fallen angel, pale, disheveled, his expensive suit ruined by mud and blood, his platinum hair plastered to his forehead. "We need to seal the tunnel," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "Snape won't follow us," Hermione said, crawling over to him, "and the willow will kill anyone else." She reached for his hand, the left one, wrapped in the bloody handkerchief. He tried to pull it away, a reflex of hiding his weakness, but she held firm. "Let me see," she whispered. Draco opened his eyes. The grey was blown wide, swallowing the iris. He looked at her with a mixture of awe and devastation that stole the breath from her lungs. "You're crying again," he observed softly. Hermione touched her cheek. She was. The tears were silent and continuous. "I can't stop. It's all so much. The feeling. It's overwhelming." "I told you," he muttered, letting her unwrap the cloth. "Pain is the price of being human." "It's not just pain," she corrected him. She looked at the cut on his palm. It was deep, angry, and oozing dark blood. It's relief. It's fear. It's you. She drew her wand. Her hand was trembling, but her voice was steady. Vulnera sanentur. The spell wove over his skin. The blood stopped flowing. The flesh knit together, leaving behind a stark white scar across his lifeline. Draco watched her work, his gaze intense. When she finished, he didn't pull his hand back. Instead, he turned it over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was bone-crushing. "You need to go," he said suddenly. The emotional seesaw tipped violently, from the warmth of his touch to the cold logic of his words. Hermione blinked. "What?" "France," Draco said, sitting up straighter, the commander taking over the casualty. "My family has a safe house in Provence. It's unplottable. The port key is in my signet ring." He began to twist the heavy silver ring on his pinky finger. "If you leave now, you can be there before the ministry tracks the magical signature of the memory release." "And you?" Hermione asked, her voice dangerous. "I stay," he said simply. "I'm the distraction. I'll lead them north. I'll make a scene. By the time they realize I'm alone, you'll be safe." He pulled the ring off and held it out to her. "Take it, Granger. Go." Hermione looked at the ring. Then she looked at him. The bond screamed with his desperation. He was terrified of what the Academy would do to her. He was projecting images into her mind, images of the isolation cells, of the memory wipes, of her blank, dead eyes. He was trying to push her away to save her. It was the most noble, idiotic thing she had ever seen. "No," she said. Draco froze. "Excuse me?" "No," she repeated, louder this time. She slapped his hand away, the ring clattering onto the dusty floorboards. "Are you insane?" Draco hissed, leaning forward, his anger flaring hot and bright. "Do you understand what we've done? We haven't just broken curfew. We've stolen from the High Mage. They will hunt us down like dogs. I am trying to give you a life." "I don't want a life in hiding," Hermione shouted back, the fire in her gut roaring to life. "I don't want to sit in a villa in France while you get torn apart by wolves to buy me time. I am not a damsel, Draco. I am the top student of the Academy. I am the one who corrupted a Patronus. I am the one who woke up." She grabbed the lapels of his ruined suit and yanked him towards her. "You said we were drowning in the same ocean," she whispered fiercely, her face inches from his. "Well, you don't get to push me onto a life raft and sink by yourself. We swim together, or we drown together." Draco stared at her. His chest heaved. He searched her eyes, looking for hesitation, for fear. He found only the steel of her resolve and the fire of her returned soul. The fight went out of him. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against hers, his hands coming up to cup her face. "You are impossible," he breathed, his voice trembling. "You are absolutely impossible." "I'm yours," she countered. The words hung in the silence. A confession, a vow. Draco let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He tilted his head and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the intake room. That had been desperate, a collision. This was slow. It was a worship. It was a tasting of the soul. He kissed the tears from her cheeks. He kissed the corner of her mouth. He kissed her throat, his lips moving against her pulse point. "Hermione," he whispered against her skin. It was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it shattered the last of her defenses. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. The dusty floorboards of the shrieking shack became their sanctuary. Outside, the world was hunting them. The wind howled like the wraiths of the academy. But inside, in the dark, there was only the heat of their bodies and the hum of the bond. It was a reclaiming. Every touch was a defiance of the academy's laws. They had been taught that touch was weakness, that emotion was fuel. But here, touch was strength. Emotion was the anchor. Hermione ran her hands over the scars on his chest, marks from duel practice, from dark rituals. She kissed them, claiming them. Draco worshipped her mind, his touch reverent, treating her not as a mudblood, not as a rival, but as the most precious thing in the universe. For an hour, they weren't fugitives. They were just a boy and a girl who had found each other in the dark. Later, the silence returned. They sat huddled together in the corner, Draco's cloak wrapped around both of them. Hermione's head rested on his shoulder. He was tracing patterns on her arm, his touch soothing. "The memory," Draco said quietly, breaking the peace. "The one you took back. What happens to it?" Hermione shifted, pulling the glowing wisp from her pocket. It was contained in a small, transfigured vial now. It swirled lazily, golden and bright. "It's not just a memory anymore," she said, her mind shifting back into analytical mode. "Draco, when I touched it, I felt the network." "The network?" "The ley lines," she explained, sitting up. "The Academy's wards are powered by these memories. They are all connected, a web of stolen joy holding up a fortress of misery. My memory? It was the keystone. That's why Crouch wanted the happiest one. It's the strongest fuel." She looked at him, her brown eyes gleaming with dangerous intelligence. "If I reabsorb this, I just get my feelings back. But if we invert it?" Draco frowned, his sharp mind catching up. "Invert the polarity. Turn the fuel into a poison." "Exactly," Hermione said, her voice rising with excitement. "The system is designed to consume joy to create oppression. But if we feed it a corrupted signal, if we feed it rebellion disguised as joy, if we pump that through the ley lines, it would overload the wards," Draco finished, a slow grin spreading across his face. "It would bring the barriers down, all of them. The isolation cells, the mental dampers, the suppression fields. It would wake everyone up," Hermione whispered. "Every student, every teacher, they would feel everything at once." Draco looked at the vial. "It's a bomb." "It's the truth," she corrected. A loud crack echoed from outside. Then another. Apparition. Draco stiffened. The bond spiked with cold, hard alertness. "They're here," he whispered. He stood up, pulling Hermione with him. He moved to the boarded-up window, peering through a crack. "Aurors," he reported grimly, "and the elite guard. Yaxley is leading them." He turned back to her. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold aristocrat's resolve. He buttoned his ruined jacket. He checked his wand. "We can't escape," he said calmly. "They have the shack surrounded. Anti-apparition wards are already up." Hermione stood beside him. She wasn't afraid. She felt the heavy, comforting weight of his presence in her mind. "We don't need to escape," she said, clutching the vial. "We just need to get to the willow's roots. They touch the ley lines." "The roots are in the tunnel," Draco said. "We have to go back down." "They'll be coming up the tunnel," Hermione pointed out. "Then we meet them in the middle," Draco said. He looked at her, and the seesaw settled into perfect balance. No more approach and repulsion, just unity. He reached out and took her hand. Are you ready, Granger? Hermione looked at the door leading to the tunnel. She could hear footsteps approaching, heavy, confident boots. She felt the oppressive magic of the academy pressing in. But she also felt the golden warmth of the memory in her hand, and she felt the steel of the boy beside her. "I'm ready, Malfoy," she said. Draco kicked the trapdoor open. "Then let's go break their world." They descended into the dark, not running away, but running toward the fight. The end was coming, but for the first time in the history of the Dark Academy, its best students weren't afraid of the dark. They were bringing the light. The tunnel under the Whomping Willow was a throat of suffocating darkness. They moved not as two students, but as a single organism. Draco took the lead, his wand casting a pale, shivering light that barely penetrated the gloom. Hermione was close behind, her hand gripping the back of his ruined suit jacket, her other hand clutching the vial of golden memory as if it were a grenade. The air grew heavier with every step. It wasn't just the damp earth. It was the magic of the academy pressing down on them. They were walking into the roots of the beast. "They're close," Draco whispered. Through the bond, Hermione felt it before she heard it. A jagged spike of anticipation, not fear. Draco had moved past fear into a cold, lethal calm. It was the focus of a predator. "How many?" she breathed. 3 ahead. Yaxley, 2 guards. He stopped, turning to look at her. In the wand light, his face was smeared with mud and blood, but his eyes were diamonds, hard and unbreakable. "The route nexus is about 50 yards past the bend. I'll clear the path. You run." "We fight together," Hermione corrected, her voice tight. "Not this time," Draco said, his voice dropping to a harsh command. "You have the payload. If you fall, the memory is lost. If I fall, I'm just collateral." "Don't say that," she hissed, grabbing his lapel. "It's the truth," he said, and for a fleeting second the bond softened. He leaned in, pressing a hard, fast kiss to her forehead. It felt like a goodbye. "Be brilliant, Granger. Be fast." He turned and extinguished his light. "Nox." Darkness swallowed them. Then Draco moved. He didn't run. He exploded forward. Hermione scrambled after him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. They rounded the bend, and the tunnel erupted into chaos. "Stupefy! Expulso! Confringo!" Green and red light slashed through the dark, illuminating the wet walls in strobe-like flashes. Yaxley stood in the center of the tunnel, flanked by 2 masked figures. "Traitor!" Yaxley roared, deflecting a curse with a lazy flick of his wrist. "Filth! You dare raise your wand against your own kind?" "My kind?" Draco laughed, a sound that chilled Hermione's blood. It was devoid of humor, sharp as a blade. He ducked under a jet of green light, spinning with dancer-like grace to fire a blasting curse at the ceiling. "My kind are not butchers, Yaxley. We are merely better than you." Debris rained down, separating one of the guards from the pack. Draco didn't hesitate. He was a blur of motion, his wand moving faster than Hermione had ever seen in class. He wasn't dueling for points. He was dueling to kill. Hermione didn't watch. She ran. She hugged the wall, ducking under the crossfire. She saw Yaxley turn his attention to her, his eyes widening as he saw the golden glow of the vial in her hand. "Stop her!" Yaxley screamed. "Avada! Expelliarmus!" Draco shouted, throwing himself into the line of fire. The killing curse missed Hermione by inches, shattering the rock beside her ear. The shockwave threw her forward. She hit the mud hard, sliding, but she kept the vial raised, protected. She scrambled up. The nexus was there. It was a grotesque knot of roots pulsing with a sick black light. The ley lines, the veins of the academy. They throbbed with the heartbeat of the castle above, sucking energy from the earth. "Do it!" Draco screamed from behind her. Hermione turned. The scene was a nightmare. Draco was fighting two men at once. He was holding his own, but he was tiring. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, blinding him on one side. Yaxley was toying with him, firing heavy, bone-breaking curses that forced Draco to shield constantly, preventing him from attacking. Hermione looked at the roots, then at Draco. If she began the inversion ritual, she would be defenseless for 30 seconds. Draco couldn't hold them off that long. Not alone. "Draco!" she screamed. "I need cover!" He heard her. He didn't look back. He parried a curse that would have taken his head off, and then did the unthinkable. He dropped his shield. Yaxley grinned, raising his wand for the final blow. But Draco didn't attack Yaxley. He pointed his wand at the ceiling of the tunnel, directly between himself and Hermione. Bombarda Maxima. The explosion was deafening. The roof of the tunnel collapsed. Tons of earth and rock came crashing down. Hermione screamed, diving toward the roots to avoid being crushed. Dust and darkness choked the air. When the rumble stopped, there was silence. "Draco!" Hermione coughed, waving her wand to clear the dust. A wall of rubble now blocked the tunnel. She was sealed in. She was alone with the roots. "I'm here." Draco's voice came from the other side of the wall. It sounded strained, tight with pain. "I bought you time. Finish it." "You trapped yourself with them!" Hermione cried, falling to her knees by the rubble. She clawed at the rocks. "Draco, you can't—" "I can hold them," he lied. She could feel the lie through the bond. It tasted like ash. "Do the ritual, Hermione. Make it count." On the other side, she heard the sizzle of spells starting again. She heard Draco grunt in pain. She heard Yaxley's cruel laughter. He is going to die. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He trapped himself in a cage with a tiger to give me the key. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. But the bond wasn't filled with fear anymore. It was filled with a terrifying, absolute acceptance. "Focus," Draco's voice echoed in her mind, bypassing his lips. "Focus on the work. Ignore the pain. Do what you were born to do." He was quoting her own study mantra back to her. Hermione let out a sob that turned into a scream of rage. She spun around to face the black, pulsing roots. She uncorked the vial. The golden wisp of memory floated out, innocent and beautiful in the dark, damp hole. "You want fuel?" Hermione hissed at the roots. "You want emotion? Take it." She grabbed the memory with her left hand and slammed it into the black pulse of the ley line. She raised her wand with her right. Inverto. The reaction was instantaneous. The black roots seized. They convulsed like a dying animal. The golden light didn't just enter the system, it attacked it. Hermione felt the magic kick back. It traveled up her arms, searing her veins with white-hot fire. She screamed, but she didn't let go. She had to guide it. She had to force the hope into the veins of the castle. Above her, in the academy, the floorboards would be trembling. The candles would be flaring. The students, sleeping in their cold dorms, would be waking up with hearts pounding, feeling a sudden, inexplicable rush of warmth. "More," the bond demanded. Draco's voice. "Give them everything." Hermione poured her own magic into the spell. She poured her love for him, her anger at the system, her grief, her hope. She pushed it all into the root. The root turned gold. The gold spread. It shot up the veins faster and faster, racing toward the castle. Crack! The sound of the wards shattering. It was a sound not heard with ears, but with the soul. The oppressive weight that had hung over the academy for centuries simply vanished. It was done. Hermione slumped back against the rubble, gasping, her arms smoking, her magical core drained to the dregs. "Draco," she whispered. "Draco, I did it." Silence from the other side of the wall. "Draco!" She pressed her ear to the rocks. "Draco, say something!" Nothing. No spellfire, no taunts. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her exhaustion. She raised her wand, her hand shaking violently. "Reducto," she croaked. A small hole blasted through the rubble, just enough to see through. Hermione put her eye to the gap. The tunnel on the other side was illuminated by Yaxley's wand. The air was thick with dust. Yaxley was standing tall, brushing dirt from his robes. He was smiling. At his feet, face down in the mud, lay Draco. He wasn't moving. His wand lay snapped in two pieces a few feet away. Hermione stopped breathing. Yaxley looked down at the fallen boy, then kicked him in the ribs. Draco's body jerked lifelessly. "A valiant effort," Yaxley called out, staring directly at the hole in the rubble. He knew she was watching. But ultimately, blood tells. He was always too soft, too much like his mother. "Don't touch him!" Hermione screamed, scrabbling at the rocks, tearing her fingernails. "Leave him alone." "He is breathing, Miss Granger," Yaxley said coolly. "For now. The headmaster will be very interested to dissect the mind that betrayed him. I imagine the process will be lengthy." Two guards stepped forward. They grabbed Draco by the arms and dragged him up. His head lolled back, his face pale and streaked with blood, his eyes closed. Hermione reached out with her mind. She slammed against the bond. It was there, but it was faint. A tiny, flickering candle in a hurricane. He was unconscious. He couldn't hear her. "Come out, Granger," Yaxley taunted. "Join him. We can make it a double execution." Hermione raised her wand to blast the rest of the wall, to charge, to die fighting. But then the ground shook. The roots behind her were glowing so bright it was blinding. The magic she had unleashed was not just breaking the wards, it was destabilizing the foundations. The tunnel was coming down. "Run." It wasn't Draco's voice. It was her own logic. Cold, hard, survivalist. If you are captured, he dies. If you escape, you can save him. She looked through the hole one last time. She saw them dragging him away, back up toward the castle, back into the belly of the beast she had just wounded. She saw the broken pieces of his hawthorn wand in the mud. "I will come for you," she whispered, the promise burning in her throat like acid. "I will burn the rest of it down to find you." She turned away. Tears streamed down her face, blinding her, but she forced her legs to move. She ran deeper into the tunnel, away from him, away from the light, plunging into the unknown darkness of the forest beyond. As she ran, the bond throbbed, a dull, aching pulse of pain that matched her own heartbeat. Warmth, cold. The seesaw had tipped. The fire of their rebellion had been extinguished, leaving her alone in the freezing dark. But this time, the cold didn't make her numb. It made her dangerous.
I know, I know. The ending is harsh. You probably want to curse me for leaving Draco in the dark and Hermione with a broken heart. But remember, The darkness hour is always before the dawn. The Hermione running into the forest is not the same girl from the library. Now she has something more dangerous than magic. She has a goal. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for feeling the cold and the fire. Your emotions are the only fuel that will bring me back to write the sequel.